Hello guys, it's Revolution. In this video we're going to talk about whether or not the top tier Dragon Ball Super fighters are above the fourth dimension, the temporal dimension, that of time. So obviously during verse battles between fictions, when I do DC vs Dragon Ball, I haven't done any in a while guys, but I will be doing some more soon, so keep an eye out for that. I did feel like I needed a bit of time off from doing that, as the verse battle community can be quite toxic, but I've got some great verse battles coming your way. But in terms of Goku and Vegeta, etc. being above time, that is a question I often get asked. Obviously, there's been a lot of time feats in Dragon Ball Super, as well as statements, so we'll go through them in this video on whether they truly are above time. Obviously, the strongest version of Goku is Ultra Instinct Goku from the Tournament of Power. Whether he has surpassed that state in the Moro arc remains to be seen, and I'm sure we'll find out soon in chapter 64 or beyond. So the character we'll mainly be putting forward for being beyond time is Ultra Instinct Goku, but there are other characters that could be in that realm of power as well, if they are to be. Now I must make this clear, I am not just going to wank a character off for the sake of it. I always lowball characters in verse battles and power scaling videos. If you don't like it, don't watch my content, quite simply put. On Revolution, on this channel, when scaling characters from any fiction, we're trying to get to the most objective conclusion possible. And to do that, you simply have to lowball characters, because anything above a lowball is theoretical, hypothetical, etc. It's simply a projection of where their power could be that doesn't have enough evidence to assert it. These are facts. If you want to see characters get wanked, go somewhere else. So the manga of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super is quite light on feats as opposed to the anime, which gives us more feats. It's still not particularly feat heavy, it's more based on narrative. Dragon Ball is a very narrative driven fiction as opposed to the Western comics, which more rely on giving you certifiable feats. Dragon Ball, you have to rely on a lot of statements and scaling from a feat to get to an eventual conclusion. For example, we know from the Saiyan saga that characters have been able to destroy planets, but we did get Cell stating that he could destroy the solar system, which is a statement. We didn't actually get to see him demonstrate it though, but if we take him as the narrator's voice and for his word, then Cell, perfect Cell at least, should be able to destroy a solar system. Of course, in Dragon Ball Super, the characters now are vastly stronger than what they were back then. Power in Dragon Ball doesn't grow linearly in accordance to power levels, it grows exponentially at quite frightening rates. Basically, characters in Dragon Ball can destroy whatever the author or writers think that they should destroy, and the Toei verse of Dragon Ball, the animation side, really takes liberties with this. So obviously with dimensionality you get 3D space, 4D time. Fifth dimension is obviously a spatial dimension above that of the third dimension. Some might call that the fourth dimension, as it is technically the fourth spatial dimension. As far as we know, as far as the author puts it to us, we only have up to 4 dimensions in Dragon Ball. You can say there's more in Dragon Ball Heroes, but we're not talking about Dragon Ball Heroes in this specific video, we're talking about the mainstream timeline. Now, I have often theorised that Zeno's realm is a higher dimension, but as of the author's word, he hasn't stated, Akira Toriyama that is, he hasn't stated that there is a 5th dimension. Now, as I've put forward to you guys before, the World of Void could potentially be a 5th dimension, Zeno's realm could be a 5th dimension. There's a lot of valid arguments to say that they are, but it could also be what is called a common writing trope, simply because the author might not know that this constitutes a higher dimension. And on a separate note, even though this is entirely my opinion, I would be very surprised if Akira Toriyama didn't know about dimensionality and dimensions, etc., simply because he has been a huge sci-fi fan for decades. And sci-fi definitely likes to explore dimensionality. Of course, the metas of power scaling, etc., that discuss dimensionality and so forth and beyond, Akira Toriyama might not be that clued up about that, as it is basically something that really started truly on the internet, or at least blew up on the internet. But as far as we know, there are up to 4 dimensions, the third dimension space and the fourth dimension time. We got the first major third defeat in the Buu saga when Super Buu and Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks ripped a hole in the dimensional wall of the Room of Spirit in Time. Now, they ripped a hole in that dimensional wall, they didn't shatter the entire dimension, and what must be stated is that this feat from Super Buu and Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks happened in both the original Dragon Ball Z manga by Akira Toriyama himself, as well as the anime which people often refer to as the Toei-verse side of Dragon Ball. Now, if you've watched the animation version of Dragon Ball Z, then you'll know that Super Vegito and Buhon have a fight, and Buhon gets so frustrated that he starts ripping holes in the dimensional walls, and dimensions start collapsing in on each other, and it will eventually lead to the demise of the universe, which would seem like natural progression of the story. After all, Buhon and Super Vegito are far stronger than Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks and Super Buu. No one's disputing that. However, one thing must be noted is that the dimensional hole that Gotenks and Super Buu ripped open was in a time dimension. The Elder Kai in the original Dragon Ball manga states that the Ruma Spirit in Time is a time dimension. Thus, it's a fourth dimensional space. Now, you're probably saying, hang on a minute, but the fourth dimension isn't space. Exactly, which proves you've been listening. And that is one of the main points of this video, is that space and time are intricately interweaved. One cannot actually exist without the other.
And that might sound a little flaky or freaky, but consider the following fact. You have never met someone at a place unless it was also at a time. And you have never met someone at a time unless it was also at a place. You don't say, I'll meet you at the 20th floor of, on 721 Park Avenue. What time? Okay? There's a full 4 dimensions going on there. So, just I want to convince you we live in a 4-dimensional world for that reason. Okay? It may be that these 4 dimensions are manifest to us, but that in fact we are embedded in a higher dimensional space.
And that last statement by Neil deGrasse Tyson could infer that the universe is embedded in Zeno's realm, imply that Zeno's realm could potentially be a 5th dimension, but once again, I want an author statement to confirm it. We'll get back to that in just a moment, but ultimately, what Gotenks and Super Buu did was rip a hole in the time dimension, whereas you could say in the Toei-verse, Buhon basically ripped a hole in 3-dimensional walls, well, multiple of them. Now, it may be something that the Toei writers just didn't realise was the case, or maybe they just weren't paying attention to the original manga, as I often think they didn't do. But ultimately, you could argue that the feat from Super Buu and Gotenks was actually a better feat, given that they ripped a hole in a time dimension, at least from the point of power scaling metas on the internet, because they often hold time as a higher level of existence than space. Now, there are some arguments in favour of that, of course, but it isn't entirely the case, and one of the main reasons why I don't pay too much attention to it, because when it comes to time, it really is all in the hands of the fictional writer. We've seen many 3D beings beat 4th dimensional beings in fiction time and time again. Now, obviously, when we get into Dragon Ball Super, we start to actually see characters who can manipulate time. Obviously, there was Guldo back on planet Namek, who could stop time by breathing in and holding his breath. So there is a time manipulating character there who, let's face it, who is basically an ant compared to even Super Saiyan Goku from Namek. Of course, Dragon Ball Super kicks off with Goku and Beerus nearly shattering the Universe 7 macrocosm, a 3 and 4 dimensional space-time continuum that consists of not just the mortal universe, it consists of the other world, as well as hell, as well as the extra areas created by the Supreme Lord of the Kais, as well as other dimensions within it, such as the Ruma Spirit in Time. We also know Maris has a time dimension somewhere in Universe 7. There's many dimensions within Universe 7 alone. Along comes the legendary assassin Hit, who can manipulate time, as well as have the power to compete with the likes of Super Saiyan Blue Goku and Vegeta. He uses Time Skip, which ultimately stores time in a pocket dimension, and then he jumps into that dimension and out into a different spatial area. Goku managed to power up so much that he could move in this time dimension. So does that mean Goku has 4-dimensional power with, say, Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken times 10? Well, he is still a 3-dimensional being physically, but Ki and Spirit has never been given a limit to what its dimensional capacity is. In fact, many philosophies around the world see Ki, etc. as a higher dimensional substance. I'm not saying that is the case in Dragon Ball. Once again, that could just be a common writing trope on behalf of Akira Toriyama, but that is how some communities around the world see it. There is no way to prove what a higher dimensional ability is ultimately, because we don't know what the higher dimensions consist of. Even theoretical physicists don't. Anyway, is he a 4th dimensional being in terms of power? Well, his power can compete with 4-dimensional techniques, but is Hit a 4-dimensional being, considering that there's characters who cannot use time manipulating abilities that can beat him and overpower him. Once again, he's a three-dimensional being that can manipulate space-time. Not just time, he manipulates space-time. He creates a pocket dimension of time and space and then comes out in a different location. Of course, in the anime we have a few more feats leading up to the Tournament of Power, where we see Goku fight off against Hit once again, and Hit traps Goku in a dimension and Goku completely blows that time dimension apart. Time manipulating abilities, time energy or whatever it is, has no effect against Goku's level of ki. His power is simply beyond time at that point. We even see Vegeta with Super Saiyan Blue blow up the Room of Spirits in Time, not once but twice. He blows up the entire dimension using his power. This is only in the anime, but ultimately, if that's a time dimension according to the older Kai and Akira Toriyama, then surely that puts Vegeta at very high 4D levels of power. Of course, legendary assassin Hit gets a lot stronger and fights off against Jiren in episode 111 of Dragon Ball Super. He uses the time cage, which I thought was an excellent technique, an excellent fight by the way, one of the better episodes in Dragon Ball Super the anime, and Jiren uses a certain amount of power to break out of it. This led to Vados and the Supreme Kai stating that Jiren is above time. Is that the case though? This is the question. The legendary assassin Hit can use facets of time and time manipulating abilities, but he isn't the full embodiment of time and is affected by time himself. So how can he be a gauge of whether somebody surpasses time? Well, in the meta of power scaling, the truth is he isn't. He was only using a portion of time's power because the entirety of time exists in every spatial element in existence. However, the fact that it came from an angel in Vados and the Supreme Kai, who is a god of creation, that Jiren is above time, should hold some weight, at least in terms of narrative. Maybe it wasn't the feat that they thought meant Jiren was above time, but ultimately they can tell that his power is above time itself. That can hold some weight, but the feat itself likely doesn't. Basically, the feat itself doesn't live up to the statements being made by the characters. Of course, the characters are the narrator's voice, so it definitely should be taken into consideration, and Vados did state that Jiren is beyond comprehension. Well, what can we comprehend? 3 and 4 dimensions. We cannot comprehend the 5th dimension, so maybe there's something in that. But solely using that feat means that any character who can compete or push back episode 123 Jiren, a suppressed Jiren of course, should have been able to accomplish the same feat, as Jiren was stated to be using more power at that point by the likes of Dispo, Toppo and Belmod. For that feat to hold any weight, Jiren being above time would have required the legendary assassin Hit to be using every ounce of time from the entirety of the multiverse. It also isn't the first time we've seen characters in Dragon Ball overpower time. Like I said, this likely isn't all of time itself, which you would need to do in order to be considered 5th dimensional, but for example, we've seen the 5th dimensional imp Mr. Mixes-Pitalik from DC wipe out the multiverse in the blink of an eye. That is a 5th dimensional feat. Like I mentioned earlier, we saw Goku move in time skip, we've seen Goku break a pocket time dimension in episode 70, we've seen Vegeta blow up the Room of Spirit in Time twice, the time dimension according to the Elder Kai. Of course, moving on to the Broly movie, we have the feat of Super Saiyan Gogeta vs Super Saiyan Broly, where they collide and they enter a dimension, then fighting in that dimension, whatever that dimension was, they shatter that dimension. It's really hard to quantify that feat simply because we don't have that much information about it. What kind of dimension was it? People often compare it to the feat we had in Dragon Ball Z with Gotenks, Vegito and the Boos, but that's really doing a disservice to Broly and Gogeta's feat. They basically destroyed an entire dimension of unknown quantity, whereas in the Boo Saga, they were literally ripping holes in dimensional walls. It's like smashing a window as opposed to breaking or blowing up a house. And don't forget guys, like I mentioned earlier, the feat by Gotenks and Super Boo was far greater than many people give it credit for. They ripped a hole in a 4th dimensional wall, not a 3-dimensional wall like most people believe. Of course, you can say, how does 4th dimensional space have a wall? Well, that's entirely in the realm of fiction, as is anything 4th dimensional and 5th dimensional. All we know about the Broly and Gogeta feat is narratively, it was put down to Broly and Gogeta colliding with enough power that it ended up resulting in this feat. And it had never been accomplished before. It hadn't been accomplished by Vegito Blue versus Merge Zamasu. And we know that Super Saiyan Gogeta was stronger than anything that Goku and Vegeta were capable of their own. Super Saiyan Blue Evolution or Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken. Now, a feat that was definitely worth taking note of was the Tournament of Power feat that Jiren and Ultra Instinct Omen Goku achieved by shaking the world void. That was shaking an infinitely sized realm with just their power. Of course, once again, anything above Ultra Instinct Omen Phase 1 Goku should be able to accomplish the same feat. And that includes Super Saiyan 2 Kefla, who had surpassed Ultra Instinct Omen Goku in terms of raw power. Now, at the end of episode 128, leading up to episode 129, the narrator did state that Ultra Instinct Omen Phase 3 Goku and Jiren had out of this dimension speed. What does that mean? Well, it's not infinite speed. As we know, the Dragon Ball characters continuously get faster. They got faster from that moment when Goku attained complete Ultra Instinct and Jiren attained Awakened Jiren. What it likely means is that their speed has become immeasurable. After all, the Omni Kings were struggling to keep up with the character's speed at that point and had to have a device made. Now, this is a character who can wipe out the multiverse in a split second. So that should tell you the kind of range that the Omni King has and the type of speed that he is capable of destroying the multiverse in. Zeno ends up needing a device to keep up with these characters' speed, so there is a feat that backs up that potential statement, but once again, could it be a common writing trope on the narrator's part? After all, Toei does take a lot of liberties and gets a lot of stuff wrong, at least in terms of accordance to the power scaling communities. But let's get this straight. The writers of any fictional verse do not have to comply to the rules made by meta-scaling groups simply because those meta-scaling groups rely on scientific evidence, which most of it isn't out there, because in terms of dimensionality, we only really know of the third dimension. Even then, what we know of that is minuscule. So in terms of Goku being beyond the fourth dimension, you know, he might have speed that defies time, he might have power that surpasses time, but as a physical being, he is not above time himself. Because ultimately, even if his ki does surpass that of time, it is confined within a three-dimensional body, which he cannot escape from. However, since the Buu saga, we have seen power that can affect time, attacking potency that can destroy time, even seeing characters fully destroy time dimensions. But the truth is, destroying time and still being left with space is riddled with contradictions. But hey, this is fiction, and in fiction, you can explain fiction using physics, but you cannot use physics to limit fiction. This kind of stuff is in the hands of the writers and the authors. For a clear example of a character who is of the fifth dimension and has power of the fifth dimension, look at Mr. Mixier's Pitalik. I know he's a fifth dimensional imp, it's pretty self-explanatory, but you've seen him literally wipe out the multiverse pretty instantaneously. This is why a lot of people have theories that Zeno could be, and that there may be a higher temporal dimension in Zeno's realm. Maybe a hyper time or something like that. And to truly demonstrate that he's above it, he would literally need to destroy all time to prove so and show that he himself is not affected by time at all. Could Goku destroy the whole multiverse in Dragon Ball? Well, by doing typical Dragon Ball calculations, the answer could be yes, but once again, you really need him to prove it by doing so, because there is a whole lot of range that we can't account for that Goku would have to cover. So is Goku beyond the fourth dimension? Does he have lower fifth dimensional powers? As of yet, based on feats and statements, the answer is simply no. He is moving up that fourth dimensional tier of power, and he's probably in the higher echelons of it in terms of destructive capacity, in terms of multiplication scaling, but until there's a dimension above time in the Dragon Ball verse that's confirmed via the author or the writers themselves, then it's really hard to put somebody above time, because if there isn't a dimension above it, how can you be truly above it, if you know what I mean? That's very possible though, and as I've said before, the natural progression of the story will lead to Goku eventually rivaling the Angels, and if you look at the Angels, they display plenty of abilities that could suggest they are high dimensional beings. In particular, the Grand Priest. So guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Do you agree or disagree? I look forward to reading your comments. Make your opinions heard. Don't forget to subscribe on your way out to be notified when I release more Dragon Ball content. Smash a like on the video and lend the Daishinken your energy. Until next time, Ad Astra.